The elderly neighbor, who was tired of the constant quarrels coming from the neighboring apartment, went out into the hallway. In the hallway, the shouts from the apartment were much louder. She approached the huge metal door and knocked with her frail old hand. She knocked again until someone from the other neighbors came out. They were also fed up with constantly hearing these screams and quarrels and began banging on the door too until those who were shouting inside calmed down. How much more can you yell? If you can't get along, just get a divorce. Good Lord, how is it even possible to live together as a couple? People choose each other to live soul to soul for their entire lives. Well, sometimes sweethearts argue, but they make up afterward. But these hysterics happened several times a day, the old woman complained as she walked back to her apartment. Yeah, I'm about to lose it myself, hoping they'll get a divorce. It's a nightmare. They've had enough of it. I called the police last night because listening to this is impossible. You can't sleep with them yelling like that, the neighbor exclaimed. However, the door they were banging on remained closed. And those who were quarreling behind that door switched to a calmer tone, but the quarreling didn't stop. The neighbors were satisfied with the fact that their histrionics were no longer heard in their own apartments. The woman who had always been annoyed when neighbors started banging, calling the police, or just yelling to make them calm down, fell silent immediately and turned toward the door. She raised her hand to silence her husband too, who stared at her with crossed arms. They're going to call the police again. Why won't they calm down? Damn idiots. They live like a herd, not realizing that in a normal life, quarrels happen. Linda complained. She always got angry when neighbors started banging, calling the police, or just yelling to make them calm down. Quarrels do happen in normal life, but not several times a day. I would have personally shut down neighbors like these. Joseph said. If you spent less time chasing after other women, there wouldn't be any quarrels. I keep telling you that you're to blame for me not being in a good mood all the time. I'm always complaining, and I can't seem to get into a good mood. All I do is notice you talking to someone or getting involved in something that seems suspicious to me, she sharply whispered in an angry tone. Oh, for heaven's sake, how much more can you take? Your jealousy is driving me crazy. Tell a person 100 times that they're a pig, and they'll start winking. You're really getting on my nerves. I might actually sleep with someone else. You're constantly accusing me of things that aren't true. Aren't you tired of it yourself? Any jealousy stems from low self-esteem. Work on yourself. Joseph responded rather sharply. Joseph walked into another room. Linda, stunned by his forcefulness, remained standing. She couldn't believe that her husband could say such a thing, and it made her uneasy. She listened, and the neighbors didn't say anything. No one was banging on the walls or the door. She felt shattered but couldn't gather herself because everything seemed too complex. Sometimes she felt as if her entire life, the world around her, was slowly falling apart. She would grasp these pieces, attempting to put them back together, but they'd crumble like sand, depriving her of any hope of rebuilding this castle. She used to think that her relationship was like a house of cards that could fall with a simple shake of the table. But now, her relationship felt like a sandcastle being built during a rainstorm. She was tired of constant quarrels, tired of constant hysterics, but she couldn't help herself. She couldn't come to terms with her jealousy towards her husband. She understood that maybe all her hysterics were unfounded. But she was convinced that he had someone else because she noticed all those hushed conversations, how he took his phone with him to the bathroom at night. And all of this seemed terribly suspicious to her, and she couldn't figure out what was really happening. She gathered herself and went to pick up her son from daycare. As she walked down the street, she thought that spring was coming. It would be warm soon. She thought about her son and what she would say to him when their family eventually fell apart, regardless of whether it was because of jealousy or something else. Each time, every quarrel turned their relationship into even more delicate threads that held them together. She knew that someday these threads would break. Someday their relationship would cease to exist, and she would have to explain to her son why his dad wouldn't be coming anymore. Joseph had always been very good with their son, often picking him up from daycare and spending time with him. But Linda was still convinced that when they divorced, Joseph would want nothing to do with Ben, wouldn't visit him, and wouldn't pay child support. She had seen dozens of families like that, where the father behaved perfectly fine, but when the time for divorce came, he simply disappeared, leaving behind the family he had. Joseph sat at work, talking to his colleague, periodically drifting back to one of their recent quarrels. He was ready to leave his family, eager to come up with something to finally put an end to it all. He was tired of his wife's hysterical nature, tired of what was happening between them. Since she began to be jealous of him, she had transformed from a calm and caring woman into some sort of nightmare. He wished that, like before, he could come home, have her embrace him, lead him to the kitchen, have dinner together, and then spend the evening alone together. But every time he came home, it started all over again. And every time, it ended with either a quarrel or hysterics on her part, or with more conditions he could never fulfill. He was tired of seeing how much she had changed, what she had become. It saddened him that he had once loved this woman. Now she was turning into the same harpy as he'd heard about from his acquaintances. "Did she give you a hard time again?" his colleague asked, smirking. "All wives are the same. They start out good, then it begins. Every day it's complaints, quarrels, and hysterics. I've seen only a few happy marriages in my life where the woman stays calm. All the rest are the same. She just gets on my nerves with her jealousy. I'm tired of going through the same quarrels every time. I just want to come home and relax, not hear every time how awful and bad I am." Joseph complained, hoping that his friend would understand. By the end of the workday, he had calmed down a bit, and his anxieties had subsided. He decided to pick up his son from daycare early. He messaged his wife that he would pick up their child himself and then headed to his car. Waiting by his car was a bright, tall, slender woman dressed in a business suit. They got into the car, and as soon as their car pulled out of the parking lot, he stopped and kissed her as passionately as he could. He had missed her like crazy, and she could no longer contain the feelings that were burning inside her. They worked together, pretending that he was giving her a ride home, but they could hardly hide the relationship that existed between them. He didn't just love her, he adored her. He worshipped her and couldn't understand why he still couldn't break these family ties with his wife to be with her. "How long do you think this will go on?" Sarah asked, looking at Joseph. He was grateful to her for starting calmly, for her always logical and modest conversation. She always spoke as if she were just beginning a casual conversation, regardless of how serious the topic was between them. "I think it will all end soon. Just hang on a bit, I just need a little more time. Someday, we'll be together, someday this will be over. I love you so much. Oh God, who would have known how much I love you," he said to her and kissed her again. She got out of the car and walked along the side of the daycare center, towards the apartment buildings. And he, after sitting inside for a while, also got out and went to the daycare. But when he entered, he saw a horrifying scene in one of the groups. He saw the caregiver hitting a girl with a plastic toy while she cried, and the other children were crying too. This situation shocked him so much that he just froze in the doorway, not knowing what to do. When he snapped out of it for a moment, he rushed towards the caregiver, pushed her aside, and picked up the girl, who immediately clung to his neck. He didn't wait a minute and immediately called the police. When the police arrived, the proceedings began and the whole mess started. Naturally, Joseph could not leave early, as he had promised his wife. She called him now and then, but he immediately switched to a video link and showed her what was happening in the kindergarten. She immediately realized that no mistress was out of the question. She calmed down and waited for them at home. The situation turned out to be much worse than Joseph expected. The parents arrived. The children began to tell each other that the teacher was beating them. They began to show bruises, and the teacher shouted that it was impossible to bring them up in any other way. Everyone was so shocked that they had brought their children to this monster that now all the words were left far behind. They all had to sign not to leave. And when Joseph finally got into the car with his son, he was finally able to calm down. "It smells so good here," the boy said, looking at his father. Joseph remembered the scent of his lover's perfume, but quickly brushed it off, realizing that the boy wouldn't even think of anything like that. Joseph started the car and headed home to get the boy to a calmer environment as soon as possible. He arrived at the apartment, feeling a simple dinner was all he wanted. His wife, as if by a stroke of magic, was surprisingly calm. She set the table, and the three of them sat down to eat, but very soon the boy slid off his chair and went to the living room to do something more interesting. "You won't believe what I walked in on there." She was hitting the child with this rubber toy. "Plastic, rubber, damn if I know." The girl was screaming like crazy, and the other kids were crying. When I saw it, I was shocked at first, then I rushed to help her and immediately called the police. Joseph recounted quickly, describing what had happened. "What a horror. I've already read everything in the parents' chat. It's some kind of nightmare. Who would have thought such a thing was possible? Our kid had bruises too, and he kept saying he just fell and bumped himself. I couldn't even imagine that such a monster was working there," Linda exclaimed. She picked at her salad with her fork, hardly eating anything, and kept glancing out the window. Sometimes he looked at her and thought that he didn't want to divorce her because they had come such a long way together. He didn't want to invalidate all of that with one scary word, divorce. She bit her lip and looked at him. She seemed to want to say something but immediately changed her mind. He wished she would throw a tantrum, start a scene. And then he, as if punishing her, would file for divorce. His thoughts were a jumble. He thought about Sarah, he thought about his wife, he thought about his son, about what happened at the daycare. So many events had occurred in this day that he could barely wrap his head around it all. He thought about the upcoming business trip with his mistress. He thought about how to tell his wife that their relationship had come to an end. He played out dozens of possible conversations in his mind, but none satisfied him. When Linda was so calm, he looked at her and thought that she wasn't as beautiful, not as young as his lover. But there was something familiar about her. Something calm. Something he loved deeply. "Mom, can I tell you a secret?" Ben asked when his mother came to tuck him in. He lay in his dinosaur-themed pajamas on the light-colored bed, snuggled under the soft blanket, and looked at his mother with playful eyes. She smiled and nodded. "Dad came with some lady after me. He kissed her, just like he kisses you." Then she got out of the car and walked away. Clip-clop, clip-clop. Like a horsey, the little boy said and clapped his hands. The smile on Linda's face instantly disappeared when she heard what her child had said, and her voice vanished too. She kissed her son and quickly left his bedroom, sitting down on the couch because she felt too weak to stand. She just stared ahead, in shock, realizing that a nightmare had occurred. Her son had confessed that his father was cheating on her. She believed her son because everything she had been saying had suddenly made sense. "I have a business trip coming up soon. I think that when I get back, we need to have a talk. We'll just figure out what to do next, what our plans for the future are, whether it's worth building those plans at all, Joseph calmly said, settling into the armchair. The chair creaked, and she thought she'd rather listen to that disgusting creak than her husband's conversations. How long will you be gone? Are you going alone or with colleagues? She asked, gradually approaching the topic she wanted to discuss. But she also stepped back because she didn't want to say anything right now. She simply didn't have the strength to engage in another argument, especially now that their son was already asleep. I don't know yet. The boss will tell me for sure tomorrow. Tentatively, it's about 4 days. That'll give us some time apart to think. I'll go alone, maybe they'll send Richard with me. But that's still up in the air. It all happened so quickly. I didn't understand why they chose me, Joseph said. He looked at her, but she didn't respond. He went into the bedroom, and she followed him but couldn't fall asleep. In the middle of the night, she got up, took a shower to freshen up a bit, and went to the kitchen. She stepped onto the enclosed balcony, wrapped herself in a blanket, and sat in a rocking chair, gazing at the dark city that was asleep. Some of the apartment buildings still had lights on. Apparently, there were other night owls like her. She replayed in her mind all the things she had said to her husband during fits of anger and arguments. What he had told her each time, that he had no one else, when in fact there was someone. Lately, she had started to think of herself as paranoid, accusing him of things he hadn't done. But it turned out she had been right all along, and he hadn't wanted to admit that he wasn't a faithful husband. Linda went to the nightstand and picked up her husband's cell phone. She had nothing to lose. She gently put his finger on the screen, and he didn't even wake up. The phone was unlocked. Linda immediately left the room, checked all correspondence, photos, gallery, messengers, and was shocked at how long this relationship had lasted. He had erratic videos, pictures with this girl, quite explicit correspondence. All things that once again confirmed that she wasn't crazy. She knew he was cheating on her. She was constantly throwing tantrums out of jealousy, and he convinced her every time that she was crazy. That there was nothing wrong, that he was faithful to her, and that she was just too stupid and insecure. Linda returned the phone to its place, straightened the couch in the living room, and lay down there. She couldn't bear to be near this person anymore, knowing that he had been sleeping with someone else all this time, making her believe she was going crazy. Linda knew that the girl she had seen in the photo was much younger and more beautiful than her. But she couldn't understand how her husband could betray everything that had been between them just for temporary youth and temporary beauty. She couldn't make sense of why he had decided to leave her and their son, replacing them with a younger lover. Lost in her thoughts, Linda didn't even notice how she fell into a deep sleep. In the morning, she woke up to the sound of a door slamming shut. She realized that her husband had awakened and left the bedroom. And apparently, upon seeing her, he had gone straight to the bathroom. She opened her eyes and felt as though she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were burning, her head ached, and her body felt incredibly heavy. She wanted to put her head back on the pillow to close her eyes and sleep again. But the realization that sleep wouldn't heal her wounded heart bothered her. "Are you feeling unwell?" Joseph asked as he entered the living room. "Rest for a while, I'll take care of our son. Besides, he's already getting ready by himself. I've told him, so we'll have breakfast now, and then I'll take him to daycare. Get some rest." She didn't even notice how she fell asleep again as soon as she closed her eyes. She wasn't awakened by her son's fuss, their conversations, or even the sound of the door. The next time she opened her eyes, it was already noon. She wished time could turn back, so she could wake up early again because half the day was now gone. She got up, composed herself, and sat down to work because she had to complete what was planned for today. But her thoughts couldn't focus on her work. In her mind, a giant bell was ringing, reminding her that her husband had betrayed her and her child had been mistreated at daycare. What a nightmare she had fallen into. She couldn't understand where she had gone so wrong to deserve such a difficult period. Linda tried her best to uplift herself, to say something nice to herself, to console herself in any way she could. But nothing seemed to work. Eventually, she decided to let things be as they were. She believed she could handle the situation, no matter how difficult it might be. After all, she had a son, and that meant she had to take responsibility not only for herself, but also for her child. She was almost certain that when Joseph left for his mistress, he wouldn't bother spending time with their son anymore, because the child would become irrelevant to him. Many men divorced not only from their wives, but also from their children, as bizarre as it sounded. And she had to keep herself together. She would have to muster all her strength to deal with the situation just because she had a son whom she loved and for whom she would continue to be responsible. When the lengthy court hearings began, Linda had already divorced Joseph. He had returned from a business trip and announced that he wanted a divorce, tired of the relationship, and with someone else in his life. When he was on his way to see her, he had expected a massive argument, but to his surprise, everything turned out to be very calm. Linda stoically accepted what he said, not uttering a word. She simply shrugged, as if what happened was meant to be. She treated their breakup as something self-evident. This even struck him as strange. He began to suspect that she knew about his infidelity, and that's why she orchestrated all those arguments. Or maybe it was because she just didn't care. Linda got dressed, stood in front of the mirror, and tidied herself up. She was quite a beautiful woman. There was something distinctive about her, something special. She was a pleasure to look at. She stood out from all the uniformed dolls that surrounded her. She styled her hair, held her little one's hand, and they headed down to the car. For the first time, she decided on an expensive purchase for herself, but only after the divorce. Until then, she had always bought things for her husband, trying to please him and giving him gifts. She bought gifts for her son but never thought about herself. But this time, she decided that she deserved this car. She deserved to give herself a real treat, something she had always dreamed of. She seated her son in the SUV, secured him in the child seat, and he clapped his hands with joy. He loved riding in the new car, enjoying being higher than everyone else because the car was quite tall. She sat behind the wheel and started the car. "Mommy, you're the most beautiful. And you look so beautiful when you're behind the wheel," said the little boy, looking at his mother with big, loving eyes. "Thank you, my boy. Oh, Ben. If only all men were like you." She laughed. She thought that compliments from her son were much more pleasant than all the sweet talk from men who only wanted one thing from her. She went through the divorce fairly easily because by the time her husband returned home from his business trip, she had already come to terms with it and decided to move on. She would work a lot, take care of her son, and just be happy, no matter what. So, she knew she would see her ex-husband there today, but it didn't affect her at all. They arrived at the courthouse, entered the building, and took their seats as instructed. She occasionally chatted with her son, who desperately wanted to leave this place but couldn't. "Mommy, why isn't Daddy coming over to us?" the boy asked when they had already left the courtroom. Joseph was standing with his mistress. She was hugging him, clinging to him as if marking her territory. Linda could see that he was uncomfortable with this. Joseph glanced at his ex-wife and then at their child, but didn't come over to them. "I don't know, maybe he doesn't want to?" Linda said. She paused for a moment and then added, "You know, Ben, in this life, There will be many people who will first tell you they love you and then leave, hurt you, or make you feel pain. When you grow up, you'll understand that it's part of life, and you need to know how to overcome and endure such situations. They act that way not because you're a bad person or because you deserve to be treated that way. They act that way because they're simply not capable of anything else. So, does it mean Daddy doesn't come over because I did something wrong? Ben asked, looking at his mother with worried eyes. And she understood why he was asking that. He probably blamed himself for his father leaving. No, of course not. Your daddy left because he fell in love with another woman, and we became unnecessary to him. You have nothing to do with it. Well, what do you say? Shall we go to the park, just the two of us? She asked, and the little boy immediately clapped his hands in joy. She took her son's hand and walked towards the exit of the courthouse building. She passed by her ex-husband and his lover, who continued to cling to him. They descended the tall stone steps together. The boy was talking about wanting to go on the carousel, and Linda smiled and agreed that he could ride anything he wanted. When they reached their car, she seated him, secured him in the child seat, and then turned around abruptly when she heard her name. Linda, Linda, please wait for me, Sarah said, rushing out of the courthouse. Linda could see that Joseph had clearly been holding her hand, but had let go since Sarah was coming towards her. Joseph seemed nervous, but Linda didn't care at all. She looked at Sarah with complete indifference because she genuinely didn't care what this girl had to say. She thought Sarah wanted to assert herself somehow, to do something to put Linda in her place, as she believed Linda had her eyes on her man. But what Sarah said slightly caught Linda off guard. Listen, I'm not here to argue. I want to talk to you. Could you please give him a divorce? You're not living together anyway, and he's not paying child support. He's not visiting his son. Why do you keep making a scene? Sarah asked, looking at Linda with reproach. Do you think you can hold on to him? Do you think you can keep him this way? But that's not the case. He will still be with me. Do you understand? All I'm asking of you is to grant the divorce so we can get married properly. Linda looked at Sarah, her expression unchanged. She took a deep breath and replied calmly, Sarah, our divorce is already in progress, and it has nothing to do with you. It's between me and Joseph, and I'm doing what's best for my son. As for your relationship with him, that's your business, but I won't interfere with it. Now, please excuse us. We're leaving. Linda turned away and got into the car, starting the engine. She then drove away with her son, leaving Sarah standing there. I don't know where you got that information, but we've already divorced, Linda calmly said, shrugging. We finalized the divorce 3 weeks ago, and I never requested any child support. He gave up his rights to our son. So, I don't quite understand what you're talking about. Sarah stared at her with wide eyes, clearly experiencing some kind of mental glitch. She froze, not saying a word, staring as if into emptiness. Linda realized that their relationship wasn't as perfect as it seemed from the outside. Something must have happened if her ex-husband was still lying about being married. If he hadn't intended to marry Sarah. Sarah bit her lip, looked at her ex-husband's former wife, and suddenly felt ashamed. I'm sorry, but I need to go. I have a lot to do with my son, Linda said, walking back to her car. She got behind the wheel and drove away without even looking at the bewildered Sarah, who remained in the same spot. She didn't understand why her ex-husband wasn't telling the truth about the divorce, about relinquishing his rights to their child. His life was now full of freedom. As they say, do whatever makes you happy. He could have married his beauty, but he continued to lie to her. This situation taught Linda that a man could have a complete breakdown, cry and swear he's not at fault, all while lying. When they arrived at the park, the little boy immediately forgot about everything that had happened. He was drawn into a game with other children. Linda sat on a bench, sipped her coffee, and watched her child play. She also kept an eye on the time because her sister was supposed to arrive soon. When she saw the plump, pretty girl entering the park, she quickly got up and hurried to embrace her. "Linda, you look absolutely stunning," her sister said, with a sincere smile. "It's so nice to see that you're happy, that you look so joyful and radiant." Today was the final court hearing, and she got a substantial sentence. What's not to be happy about? You know, there was Joseph. He didn't even come to us. Ben asked me if he was to blame for Dad not coming to us or not. It's so painful to realize that the little one blames himself. Although, in reality, it's not like that at all. I tried to explain to him that he's not to blame for anything. But somehow, it makes me sad about what's happening, Linda said, recounting what had happened outside the courthouse and inside. She looked towards the playground. Right now, Ben was pretending to be a pirate, running around the ship and giving orders. "Don't worry, everything will be fine, you'll see. He's a good boy. He'll grow up and understand everything." And Joseph. Joseph will probably understand everything someday too. But it will be too late by then. I think things aren't going well with them if he still hasn't said that we're divorced. But I want you to always remember how he treated you. Maybe he doesn't want to marry her because he actually wants to get you and your son back. But I really hope you don't get back together because you can't forgive something like that, her sister said. I think the same way. You know, overall, I think everything will be fine with Ben and me. He'll grow up to be a wonderful young man, a great husband. Someday he'll get married and never treat his wife like that, Linda said, still smiling at her son. They chatted, drank coffee, just enjoying the fact that they could talk without worrying about work. Both of them worked online, so they could afford to take breaks at any time. They talked, laughed, and overall, the day was filled with pleasant memories. Years had passed since Linda stood in the park, chatting with her sister, as the final court session had unfolded behind them. And to this day, she remembered that day with warmth because it somehow stood out in her memory. Her sister had gone abroad again and now visited very rarely. But for some reason, that day in the park seemed to be the brightest to her. She answered the phone call, got into her car, and just froze. When she looked back on her past, she found it hard to realize how much her life had changed. She had been unhappy in her marriage, constantly jealous of her husband, and constantly regretted her inability to explain to her son why his father didn't want to spend time with him. It had been incredibly difficult for her to get back on her feet, to work again, to go back to her second job to secure a decent future for her son. But now, everything had changed. She felt absolutely happy. When she looked back on the past, she no longer blamed herself, no longer blamed her ex-husband. She was simply grateful for the lesson in her life. She arrived at the school, picked up her son, and they headed towards the apartment buildings together. The boy was excitedly recounting what had happened at school, how he had received new grades, and how he had excelled in sports competitions. Linda was immensely proud of her son and tried to spend as much time with him as possible. They got out of the car and walked towards their home. As the boy bounced around, he continued to share an interesting story. When they passed the courtyard, Linda was shocked when she saw her ex-husband's face. When he looked up and saw her, he couldn't utter a word. He saw her in an expensive suit, arriving in an upscale car, and it was evident that she was far from struggling. "Dad!" the boy shouted and rushed off in a direction where the janitor had turned. He saw a man in a business suit pull up in a fancy car, scoop up the boy, and twirl him in the air. He looked at his ex-wife, seeing how lovingly Linda gazed at this man. And once, she had looked at him with the same loving eyes. He remained silent because he didn't know what he could say. He had let his family slip away, let go of the woman who truly loved him. He had orchestrated things in such a way that he didn't even want to live anymore. He felt like he had hit rock bottom, from which there seemed to be no way out. And there was no one by his side who could extend a helping hand or even lower a ladder. How did this happen? Did you remarry? He asked, realizing that he was asking questions he didn't really want the answers to. Yes, I'm married. I have a happy marriage, a wonderful job, a big house. I came to visit his mother. Why do you ask? She replied. You can't imagine how much I regret leaving you back then. Sarah turned out to be completely different from what I thought. And very soon, she started nagging at me just like you did. The same scandals, the same fits of jealousy, it all started all over again. I left one like that, only to end up with another, he said sharply. I went to another one, and it turned out she swindled me out of money, and I had to get into debt. In the end, I hit rock bottom in life. The man was filled with remorse and regret as he looked at the life he had lost and the happiness he had missed out on. Linda nodded, said nothing to him, and went to her husband. He asked her something, she waved her hand, kissed him, and they walked into the apartment building together. Joseph felt tears welling up in his eyes. He turned away, not wanting to watch the happy family where he had once belonged. Now, he could only watch from the sidelines, envy how another man had become a real father to his son. All the words Joseph had spoken were utterly insignificant to Linda. She knew he was lying. Because if he wanted to be with them, if he wanted to reach out to his son, spend time with him, or even just come to the playground to say hello, he could have done so over the years. But he never once came to see his son, never called, never wished him a happy birthday. He had no interest in being in their lives. And now, he stood before her, claiming he wanted it all back and once again trying to hurt her with the accusation of being a hysterical, jealous woman. Linda thought that Sarah, most likely, had faced the exact same situation as she had once. She noticed all those suspicious things, saw how he behaved, and knew it was all because he had another woman. And she, too, probably through tantrums, argued with him. And he would look her in the eyes, pretending to be innocent, lying that there was nothing going on. Linda entered the apartment where a kind-hearted woman embraced her, kissed her, hugged her son, and they all went to the kitchen to have lunch together and chat. Linda sat at the table, looked at her family, and realized that she was truly happy. Once, she had thought that the pain of divorce would drive her insane. But now, she understood that destiny always takes something away to give something much greater and more significant in return than what was originally lost. And despite all she had been through, she was grateful for every trial she had endured. Because for the happiness she felt now, she was willing to endure anything and everything.